important aspect. But this is the analysis of the principles of reasoning. That's what you're doing. So the first act of the mind deals more with material logic generally. So formal or minor logic. So you have the first, which is the concept. So and then the second is the proposition. And then the third is reasoning. And that the second should actually say judgment, because the first, which is the concept, the logical word for that is what? Term. And what's the grammatical term for it? It's just a word. Yeah, it's a word. So you have a concept, a term, and a word. Concept, then, is your apprehension of a thing. It's the simple apprehension. In Arabic, it's called tasawwur. So it's what you see when you perceive something, and that perception through your senses creates a mental understanding of that thing. But the process is called tajreed, abstraction. And that is what enables you to see the universal in the particular. That's the event, unique to human beings, as far as we know. So you see a bottle. Once you understand what it is, when you see a bottle anywhere else, it doesn't matter how big it is or how little it is, you understand that's a bottle. Because you have abstracted the universal concept of a bottle. And then you use the term bottle, which in Arabic you could use zujaja. That's the term. The word is the specific word that's distinct to that language, whatever language it is you're speaking. Mm-hmm.
How do we abstract things which are not material, like love or things like that?
Because you also have feelings, you have intuitions. There's more ways to know, right? We have other these relate to what are called the wijdaniyat, right? The wijdaniyat are the experiences that you have that are not of those five senses in that way. You sense them, but it's a different type of sensing. So love is something that you experience, and experience is one of the ways that we come to know something, through experience, right? Mujarrabat. He'll get in when he gets into the different ways of knowing, like the hadsiyat. Intuitive knowing is another type of knowing, which is sometimes called feminine logic, which is important because we intuit things. Wisama also is a type of knowledge, like firasa, where there's a type of perception that happens that is not, it's more of a spiritual perception than it is a physical type of perception. So those are abstractions in and of themselves. And before we can do that, because even though children are abstracting, they don't understand abstraction until they enter into the logical phase, which begins at usually about 12 or 13. It begins with puberty. Before that, it's very difficult for children to understand abstraction, which is why in traditional societies they did not introduce mathematics until the logical stage, which was around 12 or 13. It wasn't until late 19th century that they started teaching mathematics to 7, 8-year-olds. First time in history. You won't find anywhere that they did that. Which is why a lot of people have math trauma. It's true. Like math is very easy if you get it when you're ready for it. And some people don't get that trauma because they have a intuitive grasp of it. It's just something that they they're more comfortable with than others. But some children are really traumatized by early math introduction. So that's an example. So when we talk about like beauty, you have to see the particular to understand the abstraction. When you talk about love, you have to experience the particular. Like I can tell you what love is, maybe, because it's a really hard thing to explain. And it would more be, I could tell you the symptoms or the accidents of love. What is the essence of love? Very difficult to get to, right? Mahabba, right? But we know the genus. What's the genus of love? Huh? It's an emotion, right? Yeah, because hate, these are emotions. So they're related to the emotions. What type of emotion? It's a very positive type of emotion. So getting to the difference of love. And then there's a higher, obviously spiritual love, karitas, in the Western tradition, mahabba. And then you have the ishq, which is erotic love. All right? So ishq, I mean there's different, you know, love is also a genus because there's different species of love. So you have, in some languages, they're fortunate to have those distinctions, like eros and agape and philia. The Greeks have several words for love, different types of love. The Arabs also have many words for love, like they have sababa, right, which is the love in which you feel like you're falling. Which is where we have that concept in English, when and probably, I don't know, in Turkish, they have that falling. Do they say falling in love in Turkish? Do they use that metaphor? Yeah. So the Arabs have that, the falling. It's a type, it's a stage of love. And then you have like ishq, which is erotic love, and it's very powerful. It comes from a root word which is the entanglement of a vine that strangles the tree until the tree dies. And there's a type of ishq related to the divine love it's more metaphorical because it's not erotic love, but it's a desire for union with the divine, desire for union with the beloved, which is very intense. You know, you have people called shuhada al-Quran, ushaq al-Rasul, people who died from ishq of the Prophet ﷺ. So, is that clear?
Yeah, so there is some concept.
Like, for instance, beauty, I mean, you know, I would argue, you know, that this is beautiful. Now, obviously, you know, we say in English, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So somebody might say, I don't think that's beautiful, I think it's ugly. But if we asked everybody in this room to take a vote, I think the vast majority of the people in the room would say that's a very beautiful vase, right? The vase, we abstract the vase in that once we, like, how did I know this was a vase? Because I've seen a vase before and somebody told me that's called a vase in English, all right? In Arabic we could say jarra or something. So, because I know that, and I've abstracted the universal concept behind the particular that I first witnessed, now that I see a Turkish vase here, I can say, okay, that's that thing that I saw maybe 40 years ago or 50 years ago, and somebody told me that's called a vase, all right? Now, the beauty in it, when I say it's a beautiful vase, that's an adjective, right? But the abstraction of that is beauty. All right, so the particular, here's the particular. And this is a particular example of two universal concepts. The one universal concept is beauty. That's a universal concept. And the second universal concept is vase. All right, so here's a particularization of that universal. And so there are people, nominalists will argue that that's just your mind doing that. There's nothing in reality called beauty out there. Do you see that? That's what a nominalist says. And they'll say there's nothing in reality called a vase out there. There's just these individual things that your mind is tricking you by lumping them together. And so they'll say that these words are just shorthand. That in the mind, beauty is just some kind of pleasurable experience. That it's a feeling that you get when you see something that attracts you. And if they have scientists, they might do studies and see that, oh, it's pupils dilate when you see things that attract you. And لِكُلِّ سَاقَةٍ لَاقَةٍ, you know, every fallen thing has something that redeems it. So somebody, you know, somebody might, everybody thinks they're ugly, but then another person sees them and falls in love with them, thinks they're beautiful.
But there are, if someone says that we have to be educated to say that it's beautiful, we as Muslims think that we have the idea of beauty in ourselves without being educated to that.
Well, you do. I mean, but taste can be refined. Taste can be refined. Undeniably. So the Prophet said, "Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal." Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. He loves the universal beauty, and there, when it's particularized in anything, He loves the beauty in that thing. Just like إن الله يحب العبد إذا عمل عملا أن يتقنه. Allah loves that when a servant does something, he does it with itqan, which is excellence. So Allah loves the itqan in an act. So if your fitra is sound, what's called fitra salima, you will generally see beautiful things as beautiful, and you'll see ugly things as ugly. But fitra can go tanharif. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says in Surah Al-Rum, Fitratullah allati fatara an-nasa alayha, this is the fitra of Allah that He has formed the human being on, right? And then He says, La tabdila li khalqillah, don't change this khalq that Allah has made. Don't change it. The mufassirun, most of them say that it's a nahi, not a nafi. The la there is to prohibit, not to negate the possibility. So fitra can change, and this is why people now wear ugly clothes. If you look at any pictures from 100 years ago in the Muslim world, you will notice that they all wear beautiful clothes, even the poor people. They wore beautiful clothes. They embellished their clothes with things. When they made things, they could have made this just functionally. Just make they didn't even have to make that nice neck. Just make something that holds water. They could have done that, but they didn't. Because there's something in the human being when it's sound that likes to make things beautiful. And that's the ihsan, that we're beauty makers. Husn is beauty, al-husn wal-jamal. So the human is a muhsin by nature. But when the nature becomes perverted, they lose that capacity. And then they become sick. And the signs of their sickness is they begin to like ugly things. They like ugly sounds. So they'll listen to music that, if you have a sound fitra, you'll be plugging your ears. But they're not well, because their hearts aren't well and their souls are distorted. So now the important thing about a concept is to understand the 5 characteristics of a concept. It's a spiritual thing. It's not a physical thing. The vase is physical, but the concept of the vase is spiritual. All right? The concept is spiritual. It's also abstract. It's not concrete, it's abstract. And this is why that is not a concept. That's a percept. It's something that we can perceive with our senses. It's not a concept. And then it also, it has to be universal. And this is why some of the logicians, especially the more staunch Aristotelians, will say that you can't really have a term that's not universal. But in practicality, that doesn't really work well. So they'll use, you know, when you have terms, you have universal term, you have a particular term, and then a singular term. And so the singular term would be like Zayd. You know, all men are mortal, Zayd is a man. But when I use that term, I'm really using I'm indicating the universal in the particular. So it's really a type of, you have the concept of man when you say Zayd. All right, so it has to be universal. And then it has to, the concept, when you have a concept, what you are conceiving of is what is necessary to that thing. Like the concept of a triangle has to have triangularity in it. If it doesn't, it's not a triangle. You're thinking of something else. All right? So it has to have something that necessarily is indicative of it. By necessity. It has to have that thing. So the human being, when you have a concept of a human being, you have to have the concept of an animal that is rational. You can't have the concept of just animal, because that's not enough for a human being. You haven't understood a human being, because there are lots of animals, but there's only one that's rational, and that's the human. And then it cannot change. The concept cannot change. Once you have a concept of a horse, you cannot imagine, you know, a horse as a concept that doesn't have 4 legs. You can see a particular horse that's only got 3 legs, but it's missing a leg, conceptually. So a horse has to have 4 legs. It has to have the mane. It has to have that head. That's a horse's head. So those things that we'll call horseness, it has to have those necessarily. And they're unchanging. They can't change. You know, you can have Pegasus, but Pegasus it's an imaginary horse, a horse with wings. It's not the concept of horse. It's the concept of a mythological horse. Or a unicorn. So those are concepts that have comprehension but no extension. They don't apply to anything in reality, as far as we know. I mean, there's a narwhal. You ever seen a narwhal? It's a whale that has a unicorn's horn. Those are real. Yeah. It's called a narwhal. They have a horn right out of it. It's a fish with a horn. It's not a fish, because whales are mammals, right? Yeah. Did somebody have a question?
I was just going to ask, what about the, is it the Burak? Is that...
Well, Burak is not a horse, though. Yeah, Burak is, and we would not say it's an imaginary being. We don't believe it's imaginary. It's not a horse, but it has a relationship to a horse. It's got some qualities. And those are like composite things that have, like a mermaid. You know, it has qualities of a fish and qualities of a human. Right? Whether they exist or not. I mean, most people say they're mythological. You know, there's some people that believe in them. There's people that actually try to find them. You know, they go out in the ocean, try to find them. I think they've got some pictures of them on YouTube or something like that, where they found them. And so that's very important that you have the concept. Then you move to the term. The term is the logical expression of the concept. And the term has to have a definition when you use it. You have to define it. So you can only use a term logically if you know its definition. You have to conceptualize it before you can define it. And you give it its definition, and the definition has to have certain qualities, right? It has to be coextensive, which means that it can't be too broad and it can't be too narrow. It has to actually be coextensive with the thing that it's defining. So with man, rational animal is good because it's not too broad, like animals too broad. Rational is too narrow, right? Because angels are rational. So, but rational animal, angels are not animals. So rational animal is just right, Goldilocks. Right? And so it has to be concise. Right? I mean clear, sorry. It has to be clear. So it has to be, when you use it, it has to be a clear term. If you're speaking to a group of physicians and you use a term like gram-negative bacteria, that's a clear term to that group, right? But if you use a term like that to a group of lay people, it's not clear to them. So it needs to be clear. It needs to be something that is understandable by general people, or else it becomes like a technical term. It should be literal, right? It should not be metaphorical, because if I say love is iced tea on a hot summer day, or happiness is is iced tea on a hot summer's day, that's not a real definition of happiness, right? So it's more just a particularization of the experience of pleasure. So it has to be literal, and it has to be brief also, right? It can't be too long. It can't be, that's very important to have brief definition. So when you define something, you can define it different ways. A nominal definition it can be a technical definition. It can be a lexical definition, like a dictionary. It can also be a what they call a stipulative definition. So we can stipulate something. For the sake of argument, I'm going to say this means this. And if you agree on that definition, we have a stipulative definition, stipulatory, which is not necessarily the way others would define it. But we're going to work with that definition. So you can have that type of definition. And then you have what's the real definition, which is what logic is interested in. And the real definition is either essential or non-essential. If it's essential, if you remember the 5 predicables, the genus, species, differentia, property, and accident. Those are called jins, which is genus, naw', which is the species, fasl, differentia or difference, and then khasa, which is property, and then arad. And the khasa it's also considered an arad. Generally in Arabic logic they use that word arad, and it's arad that's غير مفارق, it's lazim. It's always with the thing. It flows from the essence. It's not the essence, but it flows from the essence. So a triangle has the sum of 180 degrees. That's considered a khasa. That's a property. And so when you want an essential definition, which is the best definition, it's called had tam in logic, and it's the best definition. That is the genus and the difference. And the term used for that is what we call the species. So with the human, the genus is animal, the difference is rational, and the species is man. And when we say man as a term, we understand rational animal. All right? And then the khasa would be what we call a rasm, which is a description. The Arabs use the term rasm from rasmud-dar, which is, it's the athar of the thing. So it's not of the essence, but it's of the traces of the thing itself. So like the fact that humans laugh, humans are laughing animals, right? So that's a rasm tam, the laughing animal, right? Or you could say, for instance, that if you say, what's a human? Walks on 2 feet. That's naqis, it's deficient, it's not a complete description, but it's an accidental description. So the human walks on 2 feet. Well, birds walk on 2 feet, so that's why it's not a solid definition for it. Or you say the human has skin without fur, right? So skin without fur is not, it's also not, because there are other animals, right, that have skin without fur, right? Do you have any in Australia? Skin without fur? Like a snake? Spiders, some spiders, yeah. What's that? Okay, yeah. So, and some pigs do too. There's pigs that have, it's almost like human skin. So those are examples of descriptions. So you have had and rasm, or definition and description. And then you have definition that is by cause. And those are 3. We had, what were the 4 causes? Formal, final, material, and efficient. Okay, so the material cause is what it's made of. Wood in this case. Probably clay maybe in this case. And obviously some paint, different things. So that's composite. And then you have so material cause, and then you have the efficient cause, which is who made it. Who made it? So the carpenter in this case, God obviously in the case of our creation. And then you have the formal cause, which is not, that's in the essential definition. So that's not part of the definition by cause, because that's considered the essential definition is definition by formal cause. It's the genus and the difference. And then you have the final cause, which is to explain it by what it's for. So a chair is for sitting on, right? You're looking at its final cause. And then you have also, you can have a definition by effects, the things that actually happen from it. So if you ask, like, what's the definition of the influenza virus? Causes the flu, right? So you can define something by its effects, right? So those are all ways of defining. The way that's most important for logic is al-hadd al-haqiqi, right? Or al-hadd al-dhati, the essential. That's the definition that is best and most useful. Now, obviously, in the case of God, you can only define something that has limits. Define in English is from 2 Latin words, de finitus, with limit, with end. So when we talk about like there's certain things, if it has no limits, you can't define it. Like if you say infinity, you have to define it negatively, right? And a definition can't be negative and it can't be circular, right? Remember, those are two rules of definition. It can't be negative and it can't be circular. So when you define God, you define God by what's called via negativa in the Latin tradition. In our tradition, it's called by salvia. The things that remove what's impossible or inconceivable for God. So that's important when you define. So we have working definitions, but they're usually negative when you actually break them down. Like for instance, if you say al-mustaghnin an al-kull, وَالْكُلُّ مُفْتَقِرٌ إِلَيْهِ. That's one definition of God that's used in our books of theology. If you really look at that, it's negative definitions, because you're saying He doesn't need anything, and then you're defining our definition, which is everything needs Him. So it helps, but again, we can know Him only through His attributes, through the way He manifests Himself, through the way He describes Himself. And this is why in these three acts of the mind, what you're doing, there's three questions that really these three acts are responses to, right? The first question is, what is it? Mahiya. And that's why what you're looking for is the mahiya, the essence of something. When you say, what is it? That's concept. You're trying to conceptualize it. So that's the first question. The second question, whether. Three whys. What, whether, and why. What, with three W's. What, whether, and why. So the second question is whether it is or it isn't. That's judgment. That's asserting either something positive about it, mujiba, or saliba. You're either saying God exists or God doesn't exist. Right? Those are the two possibilities. And it's either one or the other. You cannot have a third excluded middle. You can't have it. It's got to be one or the other. Believers are saying it's one. Atheists are saying it's the other. And the Quran says, you decide for yourselves. Here's my revelation. I'm saying this is evidence. But I also give you intellects. Think for yourselves. If you decide for, I'm going to like you. You're right. I'm going to reward you. If you decide against, I've got another side of me in terms of tajalliyat, not in terms of literal. Don't take that literal. But Allah is muntaqim. That's one of His attributes. So His attributes have to manifest in His creation. That's His nature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us those qualities, right, that are called His sifat. And one of them is that He's shadidul iqab. That's one of His. And that's why Sayyidina Ali said, oh Allah, you're just as I would love you to be, so make me as you would love me to be. Right? And this is like Markaz Effendi. Markaz Effendi is one of the saints of Istanbul. There's a maqam there. Right? Have you heard of him? Yeah. Markaz Effendi, the reason he got that name was his Shaykh asked all of his students, if you could change one thing about the creation, what would you change? So the first one he said, I'd get rid of all the disbelievers. Second one he said, I'd remove corruption. Third one, he said, I would get rid of the shahawat. Fourth one, so each one he's saying what he would do. When it got to Markaz Effendi, he said, what would you do? He said, I wouldn't change anything. Because I know it's a perfect creation for the purpose for which it was created. And so he was called Markaz, the center. He got it. That لَيْسَ بِالْإِمْكَانِ أَبْدَعْ مِمَّا كَانَ. There's nothing in this contingent world that could not be more perfect for its purpose. The purpose of existence. So that is the second question, is whether it is or it isn't. That's what you're asking. Because every proposition is a declarative statement that is either true or false. If you want a definition of a qadiyya, it's qawlun qabilun litasdiq aw takdhib. It's a word, that's its genus, and its specific difference is it's open to affirmation or negation. It's either true or it's false. So that's its difference. So that's the definition of a qadiyya, a proposition. The concept, which is the term, the concept asks, what is it? So that's dealing with its essence. The judgment asks, is it or isn't it? So it's dealing with its existence. And this is why our scholars, with the exception of God, and there's a khilaf about this, but you know, it's more of a philosophical problem about essence and existence. Are they the same or are they different? With Allah, essence and existence are the same, because dhatuhu wujuduhu. That's what we can know about Him, essentially, is that He exists. So in that, for us, al-wujud, ayn al-mawjud. Existence is the essence of the existent. And so, and then the last question is why? And that is, right? So you have the essence, you have the existence, and then you have the reason, the purpose. You know, why? And these are the questions that are the only important questions in our lives. If you think about it, they're the only important questions. What is man? Is the soul real? Does it exist or doesn't it? Is the soul immortal? Does it have a immortality or doesn't it? And then, if so, why? Like how did we get there? So that's reasoning, argumentation. And each one, so the concept precedes the judgment precedes the reasoning, the argumentation. All right? So material logic deals with the materials of logic, and that's the substance itself. So they're so you have demonstration, which is necessarily true. Now, when your terms are clear, when your propositions are true, and your reasoning is valid, then you have demonstrated something that people have to accept, unless they're just what's called a mu'anid, somebody who's just obstinate. They just reject the truth. So, if I say, al-kawnu hadith, the universe is hadith, it came into existence. It didn't exist and now it exists. And even our material sciences indicate that. But the proof for that is that it's made up of jawahir and a'rad. It's got these accidents. The accidents are changing, and so they don't have permanence. Things are coming into existence, going out of existence. We weren't here all the time. Where did we come from? We came into existence. So we're hadith. I'm muhdath. There's asbab for my existence. So my parents existed before me. They met, fell in love, got married, thank God, had children, right? And I'm one of them. And I know them. I know both my parents. And I know both their parents. I know who they were. And I know their grandparents. I can go back to about 1760s, not very long. There's people in here who go back, 2,000 years. Right? Some of the sada that have shajara, alhamdulillah. So, but at a certain, I cannot believe, if I have any intelligence whatsoever, that this was going on infinitely. That's impossible to believe, to conceive that there is infinite regress. And I could prove that logically, because you cannot have an actual infinity. You can't have an infinity that goes one way and doesn't go the other way. Does that make sense? It can't make sense. If it does make sense, then you're not thinking straight. So here we are, you know, I've got 5 children, but they don't have any children yet. So I know that my line stops with those children. I cannot believe that I go back infinitely, because you can't have infinity one way. It doesn't work that way. It's either infinite or it's not. So once I determine that I came into existence, where did I come from? Well, it was this slimy water, and lightning hit it, and the first cells began, right? I mean, this is what they say, you know, and they've got their attempts at trying to, but that's their explanation. For me, it just doesn't make sense. This thing just seems like it's too complicated. I just can't believe it. I can't believe the order of the solar system it all just fell into place just by coincidence. Just the Earth just happened to be exactly the right. If it was a little bit closer to the sun or a little bit further, it couldn't be life. We're the Goldilocks syndrome. It's just right. Coincidence. The Quran says, He has subjugated everything in the heavens and the earth, the strong anthropic principle. That the whole thing, there's an argument, there's a very strong argument, that this whole universe is necessary for us here in this tiny little corner of this massive galactic, incredible cosmic event that we're in, that all of it is necessary for life to exist on Earth, and it's actually almost impossible for there to be life in other parts of the number of perfect things which would have had to come together for life to exist on our planet. There's people say, no, there's billions of galaxies out there, so there must be life on other. Maybe there is, but statistically, it's improbable. A statistician that will tell you the truth will admit that it's highly improbable, because life here is just so improbable that there should be life on Earth. So for us, you can make these arguments, and we have many scholars that have given very strong demonstrative proofs. But if you reject the premises, I reject that premise, that the universe is created. Even though it's no longer popular, I prefer Fred Hoyle's steady state theory, that it's always been around. Or I prefer the ancient Greeks, that the universe always existed. The evidence is against you. Well, I still think, you know, this is just a theory, another one's going to come along. So he doesn't accept the premise. You can't argue with him if they don't accept the premise. No matter how much proof you have for it, if he just flat out rejects it, if he doesn't have proof to break down your proof, then he's mu'anid. Or he can just take the agnostic route, or the skeptic's route. Skeptic, most nominalists are skeptics because they say it's all in your head and there's no objective truth, and all these categories in your head are just projecting onto the world these things, and so I don't trust knowledge. Even scientific knowledge. It's just, it appears that way. This is the way they argue. So, you know, you can't argue with people like that. And then so demonstrative proof is deductive. Everything had a beginning. That's a deductive, you know, that's a universal statement. Everything had a beginning. And you intuit that. That's something that you abstract, but it's something you intuit about things. Everything had a beginning. And then an imperfect demonstration is Istiqra, which is inductive reasoning, and it's probable. All swans are white until the black one shows up. So that's a probable. And then you have false demonstration. This is sophistical fallacies. So when you speak with somebody, what you have to always be asking is, what do you mean? That means define your terms. What do you mean by that? Right? And then, what are you saying? right? What's your proposition, right? What are you saying? And then you have to ask why. What's the reason for that statement? So if you say, I believe in Islam, it's very, they have every right to say, why do you believe in Islam? It's a revelation. How do you know? Because the Quran says so. Well, how do you know that the Quran is true? Because it's from God. Well, how do you know? Because it's a revelation. Well, how do you know that? Because God said so. Where did He say that? In the Quran. You know, that drives atheists crazy. That's called circular reasoning. You're not. Now, if you say the Quran is a miracle, and if you'd give me 20 years to study and master Arabic, I can prove it. And you could. Really. But you'd have to take my word. Now you're in taqleed. You know, al-Baqallani proved it. It's called I'jaz al-Quran. He proved that the Quran is a miracle in terms of its language. He showed how every single Jahili poet has lousy lines. Even the best of them. They just have bad lines. But he showed how rhetorically, by the standards of rhetoric, he said that you cannot find any way to improve on making a statement in the Quran. There's nothing, he said, that you could rhetorically tweak. You know, editing, if you've ever done editing, you can always make something better. But at a certain point, you can't say it better. There are certain things you cannot say them better than the way they've been said. Right? To be or not to be. You're not going to improve on that. It's just you're not going to improve on that. To be or not to be, that is the question. You're not going to improve on that. Like, should I exist or shouldn't I exist? Should I commit suicide or shouldn't I commit suicide? Right? I mean, there's other ways to say what he was saying. But as far as the English language goes, you're not going to improve on that. Love is not love that alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. You're not going to improve on that. I don't think if you sat there, love is not love that alters when it alteration finds. You can't, it doesn't sound better to say, it's not really love if it changes when the one you love changes. Same meaning, it's just, it's not the same, right? And so he showed that, but that takes a long time to learn that, you know. So how do we prove to somebody who is not, why we should believe in, well, it depends on who you're talking to. If they're an atheist, then you really have to take that argument first and foremost. Without revelation, you have to take it to a rational level of talking about whether it's rational to believe that there's not an intelligent force behind creation. The idea that this just popped into existence from nothing. If they're Abrahamic, then you would have to argue what the Bible says, like the Old Testament, because they believe in the Bible. So there's a starting point. The Bible says that in the Old Testament it says the difference between a true prophet and a false prophet, if what the prophet says comes true, then he's a true prophet. If what he says does not, then he's a false prophet. So we have plenty of evidence to show that our Prophet ﷺ prophesied things that were impossible to know in the 7th century and have come true. Many things. So these are the type, so that's what you want to ask. Are the terms clear? Are the propositions true? Is the logic valid? And there's ways of determining that. Propositions, whether they're true or not true, terms are much easier to determine whether they're clear or not, because we have rules for definition. Whether the reasoning is valid or invalid, you don't say the reasoning is true or false. The reasoning is valid or invalid. The proposition is not valid or invalid. It's either true or false. And the term is not true or false. It's clear or unclear. So those are important distinctions. Terms are clear or unclear. Propositions are true or false. And then syllogisms or arguments are valid or invalid. It's not a true argument. It's a valid argument or now, if the terms are clear, if the premises or propositions are true, if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. But if you have any of the other three change, if any of those three change, it's going to be uncertain. So you could have unclear terms, true propositions. It's going to be unclear whether or not the conclusion is true. You can have clear terms, false propositions. It's unclear whether or not the conclusion is true or not. So all of those different Boolean variables, the only one that's absolutely demonstrable is when your terms are clear, your premises are true, and your reasoning is valid. And there's ways to determine the first two, the clear terms, and it's more difficult because propositions, we have different ways of discovering the truth of propositions, right? Because somebody might not accept your premises, and that's a problem. So, for instance, you can arrive at a proposition through intuition. Like people intuited that the light of the moon was from the sun long before we discovered that scientifically. They intuited it. Aristotle said that and others. That was an intuition, right? And then you can also experimentation, empirical evidence, right? These are sources of the proposition. And then also there are certain propositions that are simply known either, well, when we get into proposition, we'll do that, because so, let's see. So these are the three acts, just final. The first act, simple apprehension. So immaterial product. Mind says within itself an idea or concept and designates this with a sign called a term. That's called a sign, right? Dalala. Wad'iyya, you have a dalala wad'iyya. This results in the first product of reason through perception. The mind produces a complex concept, which is a definition. So that's the first product of reason. States through an oral term a sign, a verbal definition. So a rational animal as a term for the simple apprehension of man. So this is all the first act of the mind, all right? That leads to Act 2. Those are the stages that lead to Act 2. Act 2, the mind constructs a composition or a division, an affirmation or a negation. So the mind takes two terms. We call one the predicate term, subject term, the other the predicate term. Same as used in grammar. And the product is a mental subject and a predicate, right? So the product there in the second is you have a mental subject and a predicate. You're putting those two together, or you're separating them. If stated, it results in an oral sign, a spoken proposition in time, or a written sign in space. So you can either write it down or you can state it. So one is in time, the other is in space. Man is a rational animal. So that's a proposition. The subject term is man. Is called the copula, which is not necessary in Arabic because Arabic doesn't need the verb to be. So you can just say, al-insan hayawanun natiq. And you always have to put it this way. You can't have, your predicate term has to be one of the 5 predicables. All right? So rational animal is, you've got the genus, right, and the difference there. So that's the species. The first is the species. So man is a rational animal. So there's a definition. But you don't say like a rational animal is Homer. You can't use a singular term for a predicate. You always have to put it into a logical form. That leads to Act 3. Act 3. The mind sees a grouping of propositions that results in inferring as true another proposition that follows from the premises of the mind's grouping. So this is the third act of the mind now. We're into reasoning. So the mind sees a grouping of propositions. And that's why grammatically, the term is called a word, the proposition is called a sentence. What would be the argument? It's a paragraph. This new group now constitutes a complete argument, which enables you now, you've got a new conclusion, and from that conclusion you can make another argument. And this is how we acquire knowledge. We go from what's known to what's unknown. So that's I think that's Japan. Or is that, where is that? Is that Mount Kilimanjaro? Mount Fuji? Looks like it. Any questions? Any answers? Any comments?
We actually don't have time for questions tonight.
Oh, okay. Great. It's all clear. Is it clearer than it was? Huh? Are you ready to move now to the proposition? Because the first part is it's probably the hardest in terms of the abstract nature of it. The next ones are just, they're more like rules. It's more like mathematical rules. They're not that, it's not that bad.